Hi, I'm Dave Stiegel. I'm a shareholder at Lawton and Cates. I appreciate you taking a couple minutes to check out this video. In today's video, I'm going to talk about one of the most common complaints or issues that people tell me when they interact with a police officer, whether they've been questioned, charged with a crime, or arrested. And that is, hey Dave, the police didn't read me my rights. So here's a roadmap for this video. I'm going to talk about what your rights are and why we call them Miranda rights. I'll explain briefly the police strategy for dealing with Miranda, and then towards the end I'll give you a simple rule of thumb that you can follow to make sure that you're protected. So as always, if you have a question about something I say in this video or you want some more follow-up, feel free to contact me. You can do so directly by just leaving a comment below the video, or as always, I include a link to my website. You can use that link and contact me directly through our website or call me in the office. So let's get to it. So when we talk about Miranda rights, first thing you need to understand is what rights exactly are we talking about. So the Miranda rights is simply a reference to your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, and here in Wisconsin we have a similar provision in our state constitution. So why are they called the Miranda rights? They simply arise from a historic case in the Supreme Court decided in 1966. It was actually a compilation of cases where people were all in police custody and questioned without any advisement of right not to answer questions or get an attorney. And the Supreme Court held or concluded or announced the law that said if the police want to question or interrogate someone in police custody, they must first advise them of their Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination and their right to obtain an attorney. Okay, so Miranda's been around for a long, long time. You must, the rights are articulated. You must be informed you have a right to silence. Anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, and I can assure you that they mean it when they say that. Your words will be used against you in court if they are in any way incriminating or against your interests. So you have a right to consult with a lawyer and have that lawyer with you during questioning. And if you're indigent or you can't afford a lawyer, you have a right to have one appointed to represent you. Okay, so those are essentially the Miranda rights. Real quick summary background. If you're interested in learning more, I'd encourage you to read the actual Miranda decision, which I'll leave a link to in the video. So how did the police deal with Miranda? Keep in mind the requirements of Miranda. Okay, to understand how the cops deal with it, you need to know sort of the nuances of it. So first, Miranda only applies to a state actor, primarily a police officer, but it's important to note, like a loss prevention officer or a private security guard, they can ask you whatever you want. They're not a state actor, so your right against self-incrimination is not triggered by interacting or dealing with those types of people. Okay? So the first requirement of Miranda is that you must be in custody. This isn't always as straightforward as you may think, but essentially you need to be formally arrested or in circumstances that resemble a formal arrest. If you're handcuffed, driven to the police station, and interrogated, you'd clearly be in custody. Keep this in mind, though. This is the big exception. Our courts have determined that crime scene questioning is generally non-custodial, which means when the cops are still investigating a crime, or if they pull you over at a traffic stop, what is the first question they always ask you? Do you know why I pulled you over? That is clearly an incriminating question because you may say something incriminating. I was speeding, or I have drugs in my car, or I was drinking tonight. But they're not required to advise you of your Miranda rights at that point because you're not in custody. And that is a very, very big, what is perceived not as a loophole, but that's the way it will seem to you, why the cops will ask you so many questions. The cops are trained to ask as many questions as they can before they ever put anybody into custody because they know once they do, they need to advise you of your rights, and you may not talk to them after that. Okay, so the first and the biggie is always, were you really in custody? If you weren't in custody, then the police don't have to advise you of your rights. Interrogation is the third factor that needs to be present. That just means express questioning, or its in functional equivalent that the police know or should know are reasonably likely to elicit a incriminating response. So, for example, in a drunk driving case, if I was pulled over, if the cop asked me, "Were you drinking tonight?" that question is clearly interrogation, because I may say yes, which would be incriminating. Okay? So, how do you exercise your Miranda rights? Well, the law indicates that if you ask or assert, either prior to questioning or during questioning, that you want to invoke your right to silence, or you want to invoke your right to an attorney, the police by law have to cease questioning. Okay? So if you find yourself in that situation, you just very clearly need to say, "I'm going to invoke my right to silence or invoke my right to an attorney," and all questioning should stop. So here's the takeaway, though. You should assume that every word that you say to a police officer will be recorded and attempted to use against you in the court of law. If you have that understanding, along with the reality that any dispute about whether the cops complied with Miranda or not would be determined much, much later down the road by a judge in court. It's not something that you and the police officer are going to hash out on scene. Thus, how do you keep yourself protected? I have a very easy rule for you to follow. Keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, invoke your right to silence or invoke your right to an attorney. You can decide what's the best course of action for yourself at that point, once you've had a chance to consult with an attorney and figure out what your options are. Okay? I hope that's helpful. Again, if you have a question about this, or you want me to tell you specifically and exactly what I would recommend in your specific situation, feel free to contact me. I appreciate your attention. My name is Dave from Lawton & Cates, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you.